Immigration reform is back in play, but will Congress go along?
I think most Americans believe that there's got to be something. The current system that we have isn't working. I think the debate is what that something should be.
Updating the push for the first comprehensive reform legislation in a generation. It's Arizona Week.
Production of Arizona Week is made possible in parts by a grant from the Stonewall Foundation and by the members of Arizona Public Media. Thank you for your continued support.
Once again, your moderator, Michael Chihar.
The U.S. Senate passed an immigration reform bill in June and sent it to the House, where it hit a wall of resistance. Now President Barack Obama and advocates are trying to revive it. We consider its chances, look at the pros and cons, and speak with a dreamer whose future could depend on reform passage. We start with a briefing on the current situation from Dan Nowicki, national political reporter for the Arizona Republic in Phoenix. Thanks for joining me, Mr. Nowicki.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
When the Senate bill arrived in the House last summer, House Republicans pronounced it dead on arrival, but now there seems to be some kind of a revival of it. What's your assessment of what's going on there?
Well, I think although the House Democrats and President Obama would like to revive the Senate bill, they definitely think that's the best approach. I think its chances are still pretty iffy in the House. As you know, Speaker John Boehner he was the guy who declared the Senate-style bill dead, said they don't want to do a big comprehensive bill. Some of the Republicans like to call it an Obamacare-style bill, kind of a big stack of papers. They want to take smaller bills, been kind of characterized as a piecemeal approach where they break off certain parts of the immigration issue like border security and interior enforcement and high-tech visas and that sort of thing. And they've said that's the approach they want to take. The problem is, I think for some of the immigration reform supporters, they don't really like that approach, but they take it. And now they're getting worried that the time is running out even for the piecemeal approach, and the House might just wind up not doing anything. As the president mentioned in a speech this week, he definitely made it clear that he likes the Senate approach, but he also said, kind of reached out to the House Republicans a little bit and said, if you guys have better ideas, we'd certainly like to hear it. So he didn't kind of close the door on the House approach either. I think the president very much wants to get a bill done, if nothing else, for part of his legacy in his second term.
So comprehensive versus piecemeal is one of the main, at least, issues in the form of it. And you mentioned President Obama's speech this week. He spoke Thursday at the White House advocating for the comprehensive approach. You had a story in the Republic this morning saying that there are some proponents of that who say that his involvement at that level may not be helping. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, yes, there's a disagreement in the pro-reform camp. Some folks, particularly on the left side of the aisle, who are very much insisting on the pathway to citizenship that was included in the Senate bill, they seem to support the president taking kind of a more robust approach. Some of the pro-reform supporters on the business side, kind of the Chamber of Commerce types who typically have had a pretty good rapport with Republicans, they are kind of afraid that President Obama could make things worse with some of these House Republicans who they're going to need to rely on to pass immigration reform. You remember this is just coming down off of the government shutdown and the high-stakes showdown over the debt ceiling, and there's a lot of raw feelings on the House side. So they're afraid that if it appears that the president is now kind of rubbing the House Republicans' nose in this, kind of saying, I just beat you on the shutdown, and now I'm going to force you to do this, that would make things worse and make chances of passage less likely. I don't think that's necessarily I don't think everybody feels that way across the spectrum on the pro-reform side, though. But there is some people who are kind of urging caution that the president might want to kind of keep a lower profile.
And you mentioned House Speaker Boehner as having been the one who said it was dead on arrival. in the House this summer. But Boehner most recently, just this week, said that he could see some legislation on this issue being passed by year's end. Is that a reality?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, like part of the problem is the time is running so short. The calendar is really making it tough. And now, even if everybody decides they want to do it in the House, there's a question about do they really even have enough time to do it? Because a lot of these issues are very complicated. Legalization, pathway to citizenship, those type of things are not really easily settled, and they take a lot of negotiation. But certainly, I think the view of Boehner is that personally he supports immigration reform. He might be a little ambivalent about whether it gets done this year. I don't know if he sees it as a huge priority. House Majority Leader Eric Cantor, House Budget Committee Chairman Paul Ryan, kind of some of the younger leaders in the Republican Party, really do see it as a priority, and they do want to get something done quickly. So it might be they might be the best hope for immigration reform supporters. It might be Cantor and Ryan who might be able to push this through. But the frustrating thing, I think, for the supporters is that just time is running out, and once you get into 2014, it makes it a lot less likely that they're going to work together in a bipartisan manner.
Would they even push it at all if they get into 2014, it being an election year and everybody's worried about getting reelected and this being a hot issue?
Yeah, well, that's the problem. It's, during election years, Congress doesn't even work as much as it does in a non-election year. They spend a lot of time back in their home districts, they're fundraising, and the sense is that basically the House kind of has to act in the next couple of months. I think the view is if the House can pass some sort of bills that kind of gets the negotiations with the Senate started, that then maybe it can drift into early 2014, the conference committee and the final bill. But if they wait, if we're looking at the first of the year and the House hasn't done anything, I think there's probably the prognosis is pretty grim that anything will happen.
In less than a minute, Mr. Nowicki, give me your assessment about how Arizona's delegation will go on this. We know that Senators McCain and Flake, both Republicans, have been leaders in support of immigration reform. Will the House delegation for Arizona split along party lines?
Well, I think possibly. The four Republican congressmen from Arizona have been against the pathway to citizenship. Matt Salmon is really the only one who's kind of expressed support for doing some kind of a reform. He supports sort of a legalization that is short of citizenship, kind of give everybody a permit, which would stop the deportations, would let people get driver's license, but it would not be a pathway to citizenship.
Thank you so much for your most astute analysis of what's going on with the Immigration Reform Act. Dan Nowicki.
Yeah, thanks again for having me.
Sure. Dan Nowicki, national political reporter for the Arizona Republic. The political divide is as great over immigration reform as any other issue in the country. Here's a look at the two basic arguments. First, Jonathan Paton, a former Republican state legislator. First of all, do we need immigration reform?
I think there has to be changes. I think most Americans believe that there's got to be something. The current system that we have isn't working. I think the debate is what that something should be. And there's obviously a big difference of opinion on that.
And what are some of the things that, from your perspective, immigration reform should include?
I think that there is a broad agreement that there needs to be, on the one hand, border security. That has to be a central component. People have talked a lot about it, but I think that's probably one of the top things, at least for conservatives, that they've talked about. The second thing, though, is there's a lot of jobs that Americans simply don't want to do, and there is certainly a need for labor, agricultural, construction, other job sectors. Employers want to be able to employ people. So there is, I think, broad agreement that something needs to be addressing that. But once again, there's disagreement on how we approach that, and I think that's reflected in the difference between the House and the Senate plans.
Anything from your point of view in the Senate plan, which has already been passed there and is now waiting for action in the House, that should not be part of immigration reform?
I would say that I think the biggest problem with it is the fact that for a lot of conservatives, myself included, I think the biggest problem, you've got a lot of people that have talked about the need for jobs. I think the Senate version has focused, or there's a lot of giveaways for unions that were put in that bill that I personally am not comfortable with. I think that it needs to be focused on jobs and not necessarily union jobs or specific union benefits that would be associated with it.
Let's talk about the 11 million in the country, estimated 11 million in the country illegally. The Senate version calls for a long path to citizenship and penalties for them. Your point of view about that is what?
I think that the biggest problem with that I see and a lot of people see is that they get that track happens right away. It starts at least on day one of the bill. There certainly is implementation of border security, but the metric of deciding whether the border is secured doesn't happen until way into the future. And so there's a disparity there between there's these benefits, the American citizenship, pathway to citizenship that's conferred right away. On the other hand, the outcome of border security is somewhat nebulous. It's on a 5-year plan. And I think those two things are where I have a lot of heartburn.
If that were settled, then are you saying you think there does need to be some kind of a path to legalization and perhaps citizenship?
I think that the only way that I could ever be comfortable with that is if you could actually secure the border, and I just don't see. I think this is the central problem. I don't see that happening anytime soon. And here's how I define securing the border, which I think is very important.
Was just about to ask you.
It's not Janet Napolitano, it's not the Department of Homeland Security, it's not Washington. To me, it's the people who live along the border. The Cattle Growers Association has had this ongoing conversation. There's groups that they've been working with along the border. Those are the folks who live there every day. When they feel safe in their homes, when they feel like that this is a secure situation, then I really believe that the border would be secured. Does that mean that no one could ever get across? We're realistic. I mean, people are getting across in North Korea. The people are getting across in other supposedly secured borders. But is it largely safe? Is it different than the situation right now? That's the question that I want answered. And I think that the people that live there and work there are the best ones to say that.
Is your idea for that an enhancement of what's in the Senate version, which is a border commission that probably would include the governors of the border states?
I think that's an important component of it, but I want to see as much citizen involvement as possible. The local towns, the local cities, the ranchers that live along the border. I went on just hiking in the border, talked to a rancher just the other day. He was riding his horse a few months ago, ran into a group of people carrying AK-47s on his own land. They didn't do anything. He just kept on riding. That is unimaginable for most people in Washington, D.C., but that's a reality here in the state of Arizona, and I think that when I can go to that rancher and I can say, do you think things have significantly changed from a year ago? And he can tell me, yes, I feel safe, I feel like I don't have to carry a weapon with me when I go out tending my cattle. That is really a metric I believe in, and I think I could have confidence in.
On the other side of that ledger, if you will, is what some call the militarization of the border, that there are so many forces down there now that people on their own property are sometimes being approached by law enforcement. What are you doing? Why are you here? How do you respond to that?
I have yet to talk to at least the folks that, and this is anecdotal obviously, but the people that I've met with, they've welcomed the border patrol. They've welcomed their involvement. They may disagree with the tactics that are used, but once again, they should be a part of that conversation. It should not necessarily be a Washington-directed kind of a solution. We certainly didn't, when we had success in coin operations in Iraq and elsewhere, it was always within consideration with local tribe member, with local people. They gave us the best intelligence on what to do. I think the same thing applies here in the state of Arizona.
Joining me from Phoenix to discuss her views on the need for reform is Petra Falcon, Executive Director of Promise Arizona, an immigration rights advocacy group. Welcome, Ms. Falcon.
Michael, good afternoon.
Briefly tell me what Promise Arizona is and what it does.
Promise Arizona is 3 years old. We we got our start in the middle of the firestorm of SB 1070 in 2010. And we really, our mission is to build a state that recognizes that all people should have rights to dignity and opportunities. But we focus on leadership development, especially among our young people in our community. We feel that we need to invest in the next generation of leadership, but we do this through civic engagement. We do this through education in our community about issues important to families.
And you are out in the community now doing all kinds of events all over the state, in fact, to draw attention to the need for immigration reform, as you say. What have you been doing to increase the pressure on Congress to get that done?
Well, Promise Arizona, along with 22 other organizations across the state, have been working since the beginning of the year, really focusing on members of Congress. We know we had quite a blessing with the leadership of Senator John McCain and Senator Jeff Flake, who came right out working with a bipartisan team from the Senate and immediately proposed legislation that was important. So we have been focusing our efforts on House members in Arizona. And across the country, we're working with other colleagues who are also focusing on other targets. But I think what is important about this moment and why we're here is because never before have we had such a broad, diverse group of faith community organizations, law enforcement, labor groups that have come together to really push forward a solution to the broken immigration system.
Now, one of the things you're doing as we're speaking this afternoon in Phoenix is you are holding a vigil outside of the office of Republican Congressman Trent Franks in Glendale. And Congressman Franks is not a supporter of broad immigration reform in the way you are defining it. What do you hope to accomplish with that vigil? Do you think you can change his stance?
Well, we do. We are believers. We're an organization that got started with a vigil of over 103 days in light of SB 1070. Trent Franks is a member of the House Judiciary Committee, and we think he is important to moving forward comprehensive immigration reform. And again, with the leadership of McCain and Flake, you would think that we could also move some of our Arizona Republicans. Trent Franks also happens to come from a family with immigrant ties, and so we are really trying to stress upon him that this issue is really a personal issue. It's about families. It's about families wanting to stay together. And I understand that in his household, in his family, he has an immigrant family that was able to come to this country intact. And that's all we're asking. We're asking for people, not only people like Trent Franks, but all across the state and across this country to understand how important it is for us to focus on the moral issue of why immigration reform is important.
President Obama and House Speaker Boehner both spoke about immigration this week, pushing forward the idea of reform in some shape. What's your reaction to what they had to say?
Well, first of all, I think you have the leader of our country, the president, and then you have the leader of the Republican Party in our country who are finally aligned on the fact that we need to pass a comprehensive immigration reform bill this year. I think that needs to be heard loud and clear all across the country, that small group of Republicans still holding out for really putting a piece of legislation on the House floor, that our leadership is ready to do some business on this issue.
So you're still looking for comprehensive reform, but in the House, the Republicans are talking about piecemeal reform. Is that a satisfactory approach? And what would you do if that were the only approach?
Well, I think what we need to think about in this moment is what is the result that we're looking for? And the result that we're looking for is to really have a comprehensive solution to this broken immigration system. One way or the other, we've got to address what the problem is. And doing it piecemeal is not doing it. We've got to confront it full throttle. And I think the comprehensive bill that came out of the Senate, although it's not perfect, is at least a beginning. And I think in terms of just getting it done this year, piecemeal is just going to take longer. And I don't think that's the route.
What are the trade-offs? Are there things that are in the comprehensive plan that passed the Senate that you're willing to give up to get the other things you need?
Well, again, we can go back to the Senate version. I think we have to lift up the Senate version because it was a bipartisan bill. And I think that's what's going to get anything done at this point, is that it needs to be a bipartisan bill. We need to reflect great leadership and take people where they ought to be. And I think that was Abraham Lincoln that said that. So can we look to in our history and see how we were able to solve other big issues like this one? And I do think it's about us coming together at the table and making sure that we are really reflecting the values of our country. What is it that we want? How do we want to be viewed globally? Do we want to be viewed as a country that's going to allow second-class citizenry or second-class people to reside in our country? I don't think so. I think we're a great nation, and I think we can do great things.
Petra Falcon, Executive Director of Promise Arizona, a pro-immigration reform group from Phoenix. Thank you for speaking with me.
Thank you so much, Michael.
One emergent group of immigrants drawing special attention in the debate is the group known as Dreamers. They were brought to the United States as children, and they consider themselves Americans. Arizona Week apprentice reporter Monique B spoke with University of Arizona junior Edna Osuna, a dreamer.
Well, thank you for joining us tonight. Why don't you begin by telling me, why do you refer to yourself as a dreamer?
Well, I refer to myself as a dreamer because I was brought here to the United States when I was 8 years old, and I've stayed here. I don't know any other life than what here in the U.S. So, and I've tried to get, I'm getting an education, and struggling to get this education with this dreamer status. So that's why I refer to myself as a dreamer.
Okay. And I understand you came from Mexico when you were 8 years old, and I wanted to see if this has created any obstacles in your education.
Well, the obstacles I faced are mostly financial. Just had to take off around 3 years off of college just because I didn't have the financial resources to go to school. And also, culturally, yes, at the beginning I had to adapt, and I did that well. And even coming to the U of A, I had to adapt to the environment. And I've had an easier time than most with that, but financially, looking for the resources to be able to go to school, that's been the biggest obstacle.
And has this prevented you from getting any scholarships or any financial aid?
Well, what's going on that I can't apply for FAFSA or most scholarships. So most people can go, U of A scholarship universe. There's a lot of scholarships. I can't apply for those. Also, if I see online a scholarship that I'll be perfect for, and I think, oh well, I fit all these criteria and I can do well. And then you scroll down to requirements and it says you must be a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident. So that forces me to seek private funds, which are very competitive and really hard to get. And I'm always at a financial risk every semester. Am I going to be able to cover the whole $14,000 it costs to be here at the U of A? Will I have to postpone my graduation because I've already taken 3 years off.
As a qualified student for the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, also known as DACA, can you explain to me how that process works?
Well, that process works is that you get a 2-year work permit. So basically all you can do with that is work and travel around the U.S., which is fine. But I can't get in-state tuition. That's why I'm paying around $14,000 a semester. I still can't. I'm still excluded from all those scholarships that I would like to apply for, and I would be a good candidate for. And also, I can't leave the country. I'd like to, just because I want to go see my parents. My mom's sick, and she has a very serious illness, and I'm already afraid that she's not going to be here, and I haven't seen her in 7 years.
And along with this, do you believe that immigration reform is moving to the front burner in Congress again?
I really don't think so. I think this issue gets, when I read about it, it seems like it's going to happen now, but it really doesn't. So what I'm doing is I'm just moving on forward and trying to do anything possible to finish my education. I can no longer play the waiting game, where like those 3 years I took off of school, that was just waiting to see what would happen. No, so that's why I'm doing all this effort to make sure I'm at school, trying to raise all this money to make sure I can attend full time.
And do you believe that the Senate version works, or do you believe it still needs improvement?
Yeah, it still needs improvement. Yeah, but it's difficult because there's all these parties and no one can agree. But one of the things is that is just to look at people's stories and how it's affecting us, affecting people, rather than just fighting about this problem. I believe there should be a solution.
And ideally, if you could create your own immigration reform, what would it consist of?
Well, what would it consist of? It would consist of just, first of all students, everyone who's brought here as a child like I have, to get permanent residency, and then later on be able to apply for citizenship, because we've obviously had no choice of coming here. So then why should we be penalized for that? And also for families that are here, the families that are here, they should be able to have a pathway as well, because they have children to support. I think it would just foster even economic development to pass an immigration reform.
Edna Asuna, dreamer and student here at the University of Arizona, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
That's our program for Friday, October 25th, 2013. Next Friday, we'll look at campaign finance and the key issues in the Phoenix and Tucson municipal election campaigns. For Arizona Week, I'm Michael Chihak.
Production of Arizona Week is made possible in parts by a grant from the Stonewall Foundation and by the members of Arizona Public Media. Thank you for your continued support.